China's GDP beats expectations and is the first major economy to record positive growth this year. We will take a look at the country's recovery and how it impacts the global economy. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. The coronavirus pandemic has impacted economies around the world. In the first quarter, China's GDP contracted by 6.8%. The International Monetary Fund estimates the global economy will contract by 4.9% this year. But China is showing that when the pandemic is under control, a quick recovery is possible. In the second quarter, China's GDP rose 3.2%, more than what was expected. From Beijing, CGTN's Sun Yi explains the numbers.
It's a turnaround that's exceeded market expectations. With the 3.2% growth rate in the second quarter, officials say the Chinese economy is stepping up its recovery after the unprecedented fallout from COVID-19.
Generally speaking, in the first half of the year, China's economy gradually overcame the adverse impacts of the epidemic and demonstrated steady growth and gradual recovery, further highlighting its resilience and vitality.
Liu said she's confident that growth will be sustained through the second half of the year, thanks to a strong production base, a huge domestic market, and quick policy adjustments installed in the last 6 months. However, recovery could still be uneven.
We should also be aware that some indicators are still in decline and the losses caused by the epidemic need to be recovered. Given the continuous spread of the epidemic globally, the huge impact on global economy, and the noticeably mounting external risks and challenges, domestic economic recovery is still under pressure.
Demand in the retail sector and consumption picked up more slowly than supply across industries in the last 3 months, a discrepancy some analysts attribute to a slow response to incentives. And there are other challenges, such as unemployment. In June, the group of 20 to 24-year-olds with college degrees registered an unemployment rate of 19.3%, even though the overall job market is stable. China is set to eradicate absolute poverty in 2020. Economic officials say more fine-tuned policies could emerge in the next few months to bolster the recovery. Sun Ye, CGTN, Beijing.
To talk more now about the economic recovery, let's bring in our panel. Gong is a professor of economics at the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing. He joins us via Skype. From Miami, Quelch is Dean of the University of Miami Business School, and Klaus Larres is a professor of history at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Welcome to all of you. Gong, let me start with you. As we just reported, China saw stronger than expected growth in the second quarter, 3.2%. It beat analysts' expectations. What, in your view, drove that growth?
Well, I think it's mostly attributed to resolute policies and other measures to contain the virus. I mean, this is the fundamental thing. China pretty much contained this in late March, early April time, and starting into April, pretty much things coming back to normal for most part of China. So I won't be surprised to see that the economic activities are indeed picking up. China's export sector is actually doing not bad. I mean, if you look at the customs data for the months in April, May, and June. I think this has a lot to do with exports of medical supplies, masks, PPEs, and other medical supplies to combat this virus. I think the challenge is that whether this momentum will continue. If the rest of the world, is still mired in the fight against coronavirus, if things are moving in the right direction, as what happened in Europe, we've seen some positive signs in Europe, probably the rest of the world will recover better than the IMF has previously predicted, and that will have a positive impact on China's economy as well.
Quelch, that's an important point that Gong raises there, and that is what happens in the rest of the world. China is the world's second biggest economy. It's also a very important link, of course, in the global supply chain. How would these numbers that we're seeing in the second quarter impact the rest of the world?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I think that the numbers are very encouraging, and while obviously demand is going to be constrained by the aftermath and continuing dislocations caused by the virus in developed and developing economies around the world, nevertheless, there is a strong residual demand, pent-up demand from months ago when supply chains were disrupted. Supply chains are now recovering, and I feel that we're going to see good performance in the third quarter as well. I'd also mention that the size of the Chinese domestic market enables China to focus its efforts also internally and revive its economy through promoting in a targeted way pockets of reduced consumption that could be restored with government intervention. Overall, Chinese consumer confidence must be on the rise as a result of the government handling the pandemic, both from a public health point of view and from an economic management point of view, with a great deal of skill.
In our report, John Quelch, at the beginning of the show, our reporter there referred to external risks that could still impact Chinese growth. What do you make of that?
Well, the external risks that could impact would be, first of all, the continuation or doubling down of the virulence of the virus internationally. That could obviously suppress demand. We also have the continuing and perhaps worsening relationship between the US and China. I don't see much hope this year prior to the election for any progress in that area. It's going to be, I think, more difficult as the months progress towards the November election. So that could also have an impact on demand in the US for Chinese manufacturers.
Klaus, Larres, what do these numbers mean for China's relationship with the European Union? There was that summit in the European Union, or the virtual summit that took place between the European Union and China, during which the European Union said China needs to open up more of its markets. But given these numbers we saw in the second quarter, do you see any benefits for Europe as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these numbers are indeed encouraging, and the Europeans, particularly the Germans and the French, but also other large European economies, they are dependent on exports abroad, and one of the large exporting countries they export to is, of course, China. So that is very encouraging that there is growth in the Chinese market. But the two problems are kind of globally, the two problems is a lack of consumption and still high rates of unemployment. And I think that will contain consumption to a certain extent. So what the Chinese government is interested in, what also the European countries are interested in, is that the Chinese consumer actually starts spending more and starts buying more. And there we can see a certain hesitancy to do so. The same problem we have in Europe. The European consumer doesn't spend enough either. And you can understand that, because coming out of such a severe crisis, people have become careful. They reckon that there might be a second or third wave in some countries. They don't know what is happening. Will there be another lockdown? Will they keep their jobs or not? So they are very hesitant to spend on things which are not totally unnecessary. And in China, we see, for example, that groceries and food consumption is very stable, has even increased. But items such as cars or furniture or other large items, people are very reluctant to spend on. And you see the same in Europe. And that is understandable. And I think that can only be resolved by time. Of course, governments can interfere and push that a little bit. But I think time will help. Once the consumer gets the impression that the virus crisis is really over and has been overcome and is not coming back, then I think the confidence of the consumer will increase and spending will also increase. And that applies to both China and the European Union, I would say.
John Gong, important point there by Klaus Larres, and that is retail sales have not recovered as quickly in the last two quarters, or the first and second quarter rather, as production has. Consumers are still very skittish. What do you think it will take for consumer confidence to return?
Well, I think one point raised by the previous guest is quite interesting. I think it's quite correct. Is that people are indeed concerned about the prospect of the virus coming back again. I think we are seeing that it's actually happening in some parts of the world. For example, I just give one very good example: Israel. At one point, Israel has single-digit new infections each day. But now it's coming back to over 1,000 a day. That's a pretty scary picture out there. But in China's case, I think I don't know our American audience know that we had a mini outbreak in Beijing a few days ago, and the Beijing municipal government took very massive measures to screen over 10 million people within literally a couple of days. And myself being one of them, actually, I also tested. Of course, I was very happy to see that I was tested negative. But I think the lesson here is that China at least knows that how to contain this if this thing ever comes back again. The kind of lessons we learned in Beijing, for example, can be replicated in other cities if this thing comes back again. I think with the medicines that can cure this disease coming up, with the vaccines pretty soon coming out. And also with the lessons we learned and with the more knowledge about this disease, obviously the fatality rate is coming down because the medical community understands how to deal with this disease. I think people are a little bit more confident than they used to be in February and in March. And that, I think hopefully these things can alleviate some of the concerns the previous guest has mentioned, that, consumers would be more confident in their consumption. But I think absolutely it's important for unemployment to come down. China does face a very huge challenge in that regard. We have about 9 million students coming out of college every year, and this year in particular. So that's a huge challenge. And I think it's absolutely true that when people's jobs are on the line, it's going to impact their pocketbooks.
Right, that's 9 million students coming onto the job market. John Quelch, you mentioned very briefly earlier on the difficulty in the trade relationship between China and the United States. President Trump is now saying that he's not very keen on phase 2 of that trade relationship. Can he afford to be as dismissive as he is on that issue, given that the United States is now in a recession?
Well, I think so. I think it's inevitable in the election year. The phase 1 deal, you'll recall, was primarily around the purchase by China of U.S. product, primarily agricultural product, and also the opening up of the China market to American companies in the financial services sector. We saw last month American Express receiving its license. So the Chinese, I think, are, despite the economic travails, they're actually living up this year to their end of the bargain in the phase 1 deal. The phase 2 deal was all about dealing with the more intractable issues such as intellectual property, theft, state company subsidies, the level playing field, and so forth. And these were always going to be very difficult items to deal with anyway in an election year where the mindset is very much to seek to criticize China on both sides, on both the Democratic and the Republican side. I think we're going to see very little progress until the end of the year. So whether or not the president was right to be dismissive or not, the actual result is going to be no progress.
Okay, we need to take a quick break right now. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.
All you need to know about China. China 24, only on CGTN.
The world's currencies are more connected than ever before. The mechanisms that drive the economy are universal. Money moves markets. We explain these trends and show you how the cash in your pocket can have a wide-reaching effect. Because money makes the world go round. Global business.
Welcome back. We're talking about China's GDP numbers. Let's get back to our panel right now, and let's bring in Klaus Larres. Klaus, the United Kingdom announced a ban on Huawei, the Chinese technology company developing 5G technology in that country, and this is how the Chinese Foreign Ministry responded to that. Let's watch.
The British government has indeed lost precious independence and ability to act on its own on the Huawei issue. Its decision of banning Huawei will do more harm than good to itself. In the past 20 years, Britain has chosen to cooperate with Huawei very well.
So, Klaus, what do you make of that British decision? And I should say that President Trump is taking credit for the British making that decision.
Well, I think he is, at least indirectly, he is right. The new rules imposed in May by the United States that no American software, no American parts could be used for cooperation with Huawei, that really was quite decisive for Britain and probably will be proven to be decisive for many other countries. And Britain is, of course, in a very difficult position. It has just left the EU. What we call Brexit, and it is dependent on having good relations with the United States, both in a trade way and also in an intelligence sharing way. Britain is part of the Five Eyes, which means 5 countries who closely cooperate with the United States and share intelligence at a very deep level. And the threat from the United States that might end if the British continue to use Huawei as their 5G supplier or part of their supply chain for 5G, if that comes from Huawei, that was a threat which Johnson could not ignore. And then, of course, Prime Minister Johnson was under pressure from his own Conservative Party. There's a strong group within Parliament which is very skeptical of China, very skeptical of Huawei and the alleged espionage qualities which come if you use Huawei in your 5G network. And that left Johnson really little room, and he could not afford to fall out with President Trump and the United States. And in the end, he had to give in. I understand that Johnson personally probably was not too happy with that decision, but the pressure on him was too strong to really resist it. And I think that may be a problem which other European countries, such as Germany, will also face in the very near future. They all have to balance the relationship between China and the United States. And as one of the previous speakers just said, pressure by the United States on China and that battle, that geopolitical battle between the United States and China will intensify in the near future. And the Europeans are kind of in the middle of that battle, and they don't want to take sides. They don't either want to side with China or side with the United States, but to play that middle game, to be a balancer between the two superpowers, that will be increasingly difficult. And Britain has decided that it can't afford to do that, that it clearly has to give in to the wishes of the United States in order to preserve its intelligence relationship, but also its close trade relationship with Washington.
John Gong, in the longer term, how does China respond to what Klaus Larres says right now is a battle that has emerged, that is coming about between China and the United States?
Well, on the issue of 5G network infrastructure build out as well as Huawei, I think this battle initiated by Washington is against the strawman. There's unfortunately, the 5G and Huawei have become sort of the symbolic battlegrounds for the United States that it cannot afford losing. But the fact of the matter is that Huawei's entire networks, equipment, software has been thoroughly examined by the British intelligence, by the British relevant authorities inside and out over a period of many years, actually. So previously, I think it's last year, the UK government announced that it would allow Huawei's equipment get into British Telecom, other British carriers for a total amount of less than 30 or 35%. I can't remember exactly. That means that there's actually real real national security risk at all. And on top of that, Huawei has shown no track record at all of any kind of espionage. I mean, the United States government has investigated Huawei many, many times in many, many years, and they haven't found a shred of evidence to prove this. On the contrary, Huawei's own network has been intruded by the national NSA of Washington. So, you know, this whole idea of targeting Huawei, I think is really an argument, it's a political argument, basically.
Yep.
I mean, Mike Pompeo makes the argument that, you know, Huawei can potentially cooperate with the Chinese government, which Huawei has come out and said, no, we're not going to do that. And this statement is based on an obscure clause, a provision in the China's information law, Article 7. But you know, this law doesn't say that. There's another part of this provision that says that, you know, the requirement has to be implemented under certain conditions. But of course, you know, the State Department never talks about the second part of the statement. So unfortunately, Huawei becomes a victim of this phantom warfare, in my opinion. And I totally agree that Pompeo will keep going around the world preaching this message, and some governments in Europe probably will cave in. But I think most governments that have independent diplomatic policy, independent foreign policy, will understand that there's actually no truth in this whole idea, and that you know, using Huawei equipment is less expensive and with a better network.
Can I just come in here?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I quite agree with what just was said. The American government regards Huawei as a Trojan horse. Whether Huawei has already been guilty, so to speak, that is very much the question. But the potential that they might collaborate with the Chinese government might allow espionage. That is the danger, and that is what Washington fears. And of course, from a national security point of view of the United States, it is in a way understandable if we put ourselves into the American shoes. Imagine 5G in China was run by Microsoft or Apple. Would the Chinese government like that? Would they not also fear the potential of American espionage? So in a way, you can understand where those governments would come from. And also, I would like perhaps to add that it actually wasn't the United States who first kind of became aware of the danger, but it was actually Australia which alerted the United States what might happen in the future. And of course, another final point is, in a way, it's very sad and a failure of the industrial policy of the West that only Huawei seems to be at the moment capable to provide that 5G expertise. Why is there no American company which developed the same technology over the last few years? And I think that kind of failure of industrial policy, that of course is now being compensated by perhaps a slight overreaction.
All right, let me bring John Quelch into this. One moment, John. John, I'll get to you. I just want to bring John Quelch into the discussion. John, there was a piece in the political newspaper, Washington-based newspaper called Politico, which said that the United States and China are headed for what they're calling decoupling, which would include breaks in the flow of information, money, ideas, and people, of course. If that does happen, how would that impact the relationship between China and the United States, and especially its economic and trade relationship?
The U.S.-China bilateral relationship is and will remain the most important bilateral relationship in the world, even with the efforts on the part of some to reduce mutual interaction and interdependency, and efforts both in China by a constituency in China as well as in the U.S. With respect to this concept of decoupling. I myself, as a globalist, would always argue that interdependency is the best guarantee of world peace, and I very much hope that the commercial and economic relationships between the two countries are sustained, and that commercial interests do have a strong voice in the maintenance of this very important bilateral. Whatever the spats may be over Hong Kong or Taiwan or the South China Sea Islands or human rights and the Uyghur population, whatever all of those spats may be, it's essential that the dialogue between Washington and Beijing be sustained and be sustained at a high level. And we are not seeing that to the extent that we should at the moment.
Right.
But I would say just one thing, if I may, that in the trade area, I've been very impressed over the last 2 years by the U.S. Trade Representative, Bob Lighthizer, and his Chinese counterpart, Vice Premier Liu He. Both of these gentlemen are professionals, they are experts, they have a very good relationship. So whatever the bravado and bluster may be at the top, there is hopefully still sustained a level of competency in the dialogue at the next level down between these two countries.
All right, John Gong, go ahead.
Well, I just want to address the previous question. He asked, imagine what happens if Chinese government uses equipment from foreign companies. Well, that's not an imagination. That's actually a fact. It's a fact for many, many years. In China's 2G, 3G, 4G network so far, there's always been a chunk of network equipment being supplied by Ericsson and Nokia. Every year, China Mobile, China Unicom usually set aside a percentage of their network equipment purchase orders with these two companies. So, this is actually nothing new here. I mean, the fact that a foreign government can use equipment from a foreign government from foreign companies is actually a common practice. There are only a handful of network infrastructure equipment vendors in the world. Ericsson, Nokia, ZTE, Huawei, to some extent Samsung. That's it. The fact that this is such a big issue, the fact that the United States government are so keen on this, hypothesizing this scenario, is precisely because the U.S. government has done this before. In the circuit switch, plain old telephone networks, there was a Swiss company that was later on controlled by CIA that have been, routinely eavesdropping communications of other foreign governments. It has done this before, and that's why it is speculating, keenly this scenario. So I think, this is an issue very unique to the U.S. government, with its strong background in intelligence collection, with 16 intelligence agencies under the National Intelligence Director's Office.
Klaus, Larres, very quickly, I only got 20 seconds, unfortunately, but can this kind of rivalry continue? I mean, would it be counterproductive to everyone in the end?
It will be counterproductive, including the United States and China and the Europeans and the rest of the world. Yep. But unfortunately, it looks as if it was continuing, certainly until the November elections in the United States. And I think we are in a new era. In the past, yes, there was a lot more cooperation and engagement, but now we seem to be in an era, in a new unfortunate era of decoupling. Right. This is to be regretted. Re-engagement is really the solution, but let's hope for the best.
We are going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Einar Tangen in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.